Charter California edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. We are joined by Lois Capps. She is a member of the United States Congress. Thank you so much for joining us again. I want to speak with you about the Supreme Court's recent decisions on marriage equality. As we know, the Supreme Court struck down what's known as the Defense of Marriage Act.
Yes.
They also refused to rule on Proposition 8, which meant that Proposition 8 had been struck down, and we now see gay marriage in California. How are you feeling about those dual decisions?
We've come a long way in California thanks to the rulings of the Supreme Court this past week. Now, our goal, of course, is to make marriage equality for all. But for California to have the federal benefits in place, to have Proposition 8 overturned, or the lower court's ruling, it's a good day.
So are you feeling as if that we will get to a place where we will see marriage equality throughout the nation? Because as we speak today, with California having marriage equality, about 30% of the nation is covered. But, you know, California is different than Tennessee or than Kentucky. And so what's your sense? I mean, you know those members of Congress.
Yes, I do. And I don't know, certain things change more slowly in some areas of the country. But I think what I'm hopeful is that there's a kind of an impetus from this with the number of states that are seeing the benefits and the advantages that we have when we have marriage equality, fairness, opportunities. I think we can hope that we can go forward.
It's fascinating that in some states, the numbers in favor of marriage equality are lopsided, whereas in other states, they're lopsided the other way. I mean, we really are a divided nation on this very issue. So query whether it is best that we keep it to the states. At least the question of whether there can be same-sex unions. Not so much federal benefits, but the same-sex union question.
The fact that the federal benefits are now available perhaps will be a little impetus on its own. But I think I share your belief, or if that's your conviction.
It's true. I mean, I see
we want the states to have the say here, and cultural changes do come unevenly.
Right.
Let us put it that way.
Let's speak about another cultural issue, and that's immigration reform. There's no question there are cultural implications.
Yes, there are.
We know as we speak today, the United States Senate has passed immigration reform.
Yes.
Bipartisan, 14 Republicans voted in favor, all Democrats as well. It's now before the House of Representatives, of which you are a member.
Yes.
Where do you see reform going from here? The Speaker has indicated he's not so interested in the Senate bill.
And I want us to push for comprehensive immigration reform. It's something I've championed ever since I've been in Congress, and there we can see not only a cultural need and shift, but also a real economic benefit. This is something whose time has come, and it is important for our country, for family unification, for opportunities for young people, but for fairness and also for economic benefit.
And I believe that many members of the Republican Party see that, but the question becomes, for those that are in favor of immigration reform, can you get a majority of the majority? Because Mr. Boehner has said he wants to have a majority of the majority voting for immigration reform.
Well, he set up that artificial threshold for himself. The public is ready to have immigration reform, and the Senate has spoken with I think, a strong mandate. So I believe it is time for us to pass immigration reform.
When we come back, I want to continue our conversation about immigration because it is such an important issue on the Central Coast, of which you represent, and the entire state of California. We're speaking with Lois Capps. She's a member of the United States Congress. For our viewers on HLN, we thank you so much for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Congresswoman, I have spoken with many members of Congress from the Republican Party, especially in the western states, and they seem to be favorably inclined towards immigration reform. But in states with small immigrant communities, there isn't that push and drive to offer amnesty as some of their constituents may see it. What do you say to those members?
Well, I've spoken with a wide variety of my constituents as well, from all walks of life. High-tech communities are deploring the fact that they can't keep their well-educated workforce here, but instead, people's visas are up, their student visas, whatever, and they're going back.
We educate them here.
Yes.
They get PhDs here, and then they have to leave.
And they compete with us, and those countries are rising in their competitiveness as well. We want to keep our well-educated workforce here, and we need our agriculture workers. Don't forget that agriculture is the basis of the Central Coast. Farmers, growers, are very keen on having a workforce that is here legally.
And what's interesting is I read that 2/3 of the ag workers in California are undocumented. And you've heard that, well, we have an unemployment crisis in this state, but the challenge becomes that those that are documented don't seem to apply for the jobs in the fields.
This is a nation of immigrants. Our country was built on the backs of immigrants. We've always strengthened our economy by having immigrants be here, and that's the case today as well. So we need a workforce that is verified, and there is a system for verification within the opportunity. And we want our young people to be able to go on to school, hence the DREAM Act part. So all of this builds into a comprehensive system that it's time for us to pass.
So is your sense that the momentum coming from the Senate is so great? We heard Jeb Bush recently say the Republicans need to take up this bill, former Republican governor of Florida, that it's just the momentum is too great and it's going to happen. Do you believe that?
I believe it. I do believe it. If the speaker will take those blindfolds off and listen to his constituents, even in Ohio, where he's from.
Right. So I mentioned to you that my niece will be joining UCSB this fall.
I'm going to go find her out on campus.
You will find her. I'm very proud of her. But my niece and many college students are facing a real financial challenge. We know that as a result of gridlock within the Congress, that certain loans, not all, but certain college loans will see a doubling. It has happened.
Yes.
Talk to me about why and how that issue can be resolved, if at all.
If this affects your niece, she could see over her lifetime of paying back loans almost $5,000 added to the cost.
That's a lot of money.
That's a shame. It's expensive as it is. And to graduate from college and have that burden of debt, the burden of college loan debt exceeds that for credit cards.
Here's what's confusing, and I've spoken with so many people about this issue. On the sequester, Democrats and Republicans both agree, we don't like the sequester, yet it went forward. On college loans, Democrats and Republicans agree, we don't want to see a doubling, yet the doubling happened. Where's the disconnect?
If the Speaker had allowed the vote on not letting that expire, we would have passed it. We would have passed it.
So where do we go from here? The President seems to have a plan, the Senate has a plan, the Republicans in the House have a plan. You know, our heads are spinning on all the plans, but it's affecting people.
Yes, and that has to be registered not just with my students, our students, yours and mine at UCSB,
metaphorically speaking,
but across the country. On every college campus, there has to be a hue and a cry, and with a concerted voice, not a partisan voice, because this is about the future of our economy. We've got to have this workforce, well-educated workforce.
I hearken back to the sequester, we're still in it, but to the sequester debate when the air traffic controllers were being furloughed. Boy, that hue and cry got heard like that. Some would argue because members of Congress are flying, hither and yon. Why? What will it take for a hue and cry on this issue of student loans?
The same kind of hue and cry, but also it's a shame on us that we are still invested in this sequester, because that was a hatchet job on something that requires, yes, we can cut our deficit, but to do that on the backs of poor people?
Any discussion?
Cutting food stamps?
Any discussion on the sequester? I mean, we're 4, 5,
I'm
6.
afraid that the leadership wants to use it as the platform now. And to me, well, that's why elections happen. And in the House, it's every 2 years.
No doubt about it. She is the elected member of the United States Congress representing Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. Her name is Lois Capps. My name is Brad Pomerance. We thank you for watching Charter California Edition. It's California Edition coming to you from Sacramento. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest, Katcho Achadjian, he's a member of the California State Assembly. And sir, I want to speak with you about the recent budget negotiations. This was the first year where the Democrats had a supermajority and arguably would not need Republican votes. But my sense is Republicans were somewhat engaged. Am I right or am I off base?
We were engaged, needless to say, on an individual basis, not necessarily as a party or minority party. But overall, it was a good year to be dealt with the budget because if you compare it 2.5 years ago when I first came into the picture and we were dealing with $26 billion deficit, the year after that was a little better. We were dealing with $16 billion deficit, and now no deficit, so to say, as far as the budget goes. It was a good time.
But I want to get a sense from you because I've read articles, I've heard discussions which suggest that the Democratic governor is aligning himself with the Republicans in the legislature to push fiscal prudence. Is that what you feel?
I feel like he wants to bring discipline across the border. And when you hear that there's an agreement, the budget to go forward, it's usually between the left and the far left. So
I've heard that before.
So the governor has brought forward, I think, a new character, a new Democrat, a new reformer who wants to make it right and not be spoiled by these additional revenues that are coming in and not to overspend what's here, even though I think, in my own opinion, there are places he could have done better. But overall, done a great job.
That being said, we know that in 2004, a rainy day fund was set up. Money's put in twice, it's been emptied twice. This year, there was about $1 billion set aside in reserves, but not put in the rainy day fund. It's a little unclear as to why that distinction has been made. What's your sense?
My sense is that's one of the failures of this budget that moved forward, that we weren't able to put the sunshine money for rainy days aside and the dollar amount that the government promised to put aside.
Why?
For the reasons that they want to give more money to schools, which I supported. They end up giving more money to our courts. Another $62 million went to our courts. It's all backlog issues. A lot of money went to the different departments that had a backlog.
But what's the difference between putting money in reserve or simply putting it into the rainy day fund? It's easily accessible if it's in reserve?
Exactly. It's just a play of words.
I want to talk to you about the local control funding formula. That is a revolution in the way we fund education. It gives more money to school districts which educate foster children, English language learners, and those that are economically disadvantaged. It really is quite a sea change. What's your sense of this?
It's something I preached early on, that I'm here to empower local decision makers because they know how it fits best to their local communities, what's needed in their backyards, and giving money to schools and force them to spend as we did in the past. It was a killer of a deal. Now that they have the money and they can decide where to spend, how to spend, hopefully the needs are in the classroom and that's where they focus to spend the money is going to be put to best use.
There's no doubt that local districts are getting more discretion through this formula, but what about the element of giving more money to districts which educate more challenged students?
Well, I'm all in favor of that for the reasons that if all schools get the correct dollar amount of money equally distributed, but give a little extra to those schools who have the challenge of educating students who English is a second language and or areas that you have people with less or more of a disability to learn and be educated, they need help.
Okay, when we come back, I want to speak with you about health care reform. We're speaking with Katcho Achadjian, member of the California State Assembly. For our viewers on HLN, thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. Sir, I want to continue our conversation and speak about health care reform, also known as the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. But what we do know is that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the federal government could not require states to expand Medicaid, or Medi-Cal in our case. California has chosen to accept the federal funding to expand its Medi-Cal funding formula. It went to the legislature, and there was one Republican who supported that expansion, and I am looking at him. What made you decide to make that leap?
It was not simple, but In other words, it was the right thing to do. I did not support Obamacare. I did not support that where individuals will be forced into this healthcare system. But once the affordable healthcare became the law of the land, then I gave myself no choice but to support it, because those of our members of the state who make 15,000, a little over 15,000 and less, to be qualified into this program. Otherwise, that cost is much bigger for us, because they wait, they cannot afford health care, they wait till they need to be taken to an emergency room, and you and I are paying for it. On the other hand, let me also explain this. With accepting this extension, federal government will be paying 100% of the cost for the next 3 years, and past that third year, the cost to us is only 10%.
And as I understand it, under the governor's budget relating to this issue, there's a provision which says if the federal government ever tries to drop below 70%, California will pull out.
We have the choice to pull out, and that's, to me, was the green light, as why I supported it. There was no other way to look at how I can bring this help to the folks who can afford otherwise.
Sir, this is not the only time you have been one Republican supporting a, quote, Democratic bill. There have been other instances with regard to the Memorandum of Understanding a few years ago dealing with labor, with regard to other issues that have come before the legislature. How is that for you?
Let me take you back 2.5 years where I supported the MOU. Without a contract, status quo was costing us $500 million. And when the MOU came to us, we were saving $280 million out of the $500 million that was costing. And to me, that was a good step forward. If we walked away to say all or nothing, why should the unions ever come back to the table to have any discussion with us?
But what I'm wondering is, we know that political parties are very keen on discipline. They want their members to vote how they want them to vote. And you have managed to, in a few instances, buck that party. Yet we don't see a lot of retribution. Your voters still seem to support you. How are you able to do it? And yet other Republicans will be literally chastised and put out to pasture.
The reasons are that my discipline came from my parents.
Oh, my.
2, I'm here to serve my district as what's best for my district.
Right.
3rd, when I look at a bill, if it's a good bill, doesn't matter what the source it comes from, I'm going to support it for the good of the Californians.
So let's talk about your district. It's a tough living in San Luis Obispo County, I am sure. It's difficult in Paradise. What are your voters, your constituents, talking to you about? Are they talking about health care reform? What's on their minds?
Not necessarily. What on their mind is, time after time, it's still the economy, it's still the jobs, and those are big issues. If you go to very local issues, we have water issues, growth issues, and everything else that comes, also healthcare issues. But overall, still the economy, still jobs.
I want to ask you about Diablo Canyon.
Yes.
And the reason I ask you about that, I was recently speaking with Rocky Chavez, one of your friends. He represents San Onofre's nuclear power plant, or what was San Onofre's nuclear power plant. You represent what still is Diablo Canyon's nuclear power plant. Are there efforts through Diablo to try to increase capacity since San Onofre is now being shut down?
Let me first welcome Rocky. He's been a good asset to our organizations. Diablo Canyon is there to stay. And I've been working with Diablo Canyon as a county member of the County Board of Supervisors and as a Coastal Commission, because anything we do, it has to go to the Coastal Commission for approval. We approved it generators. That we're getting all new generators. Now it's going through the process of renewing its permit, and I hope they get it because it's a must, especially that San Onofre is out of the picture. We're 10% of California is dependent on Diablo Canyon. They've done an excellent job to make it safer, better for all concerned.
Will Diablo be trying to increase capacity because San Onofre is offline? Do you know?
I think by choice they need to, just to be on the safe side, and this is the right time to ask for that increased capability, and it's also right time to ask for to be able to recycle their nuclear waste, because in the past they did not have that right. Hopefully within this process, that's also part of the project.
He's Katcho Achadjian, member of the California State Assembly. My name is Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition. Welcome back. It's Charter California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Barbara George. She's a trustee on the Cuesta Community College District. Congratulations on your election in November.
That's right.
A wonderful victory. Tell us about your new job.
Well, yeah, new job is right. You know, it's probably a lot of people don't aspire to run for office and be on a school board. I love it.
I love that you say
Yeah,
that.
I do.
And you actually enter the Cuesta College Board at a tricky time.
Yes.
We know that Cuesta has faced an accreditation crisis. It's mostly on the other end of it.
Yes.
You're still under sanction, but the lowest
Yes,
level of
that's
sanction,
correct.
as opposed to the highest level
Yes,
of sanction.
that's right. That was a big change.
Yeah, and so how is it going with Cuesta's still being under the purview of the
Yes.
accrediting board?
That's right. Very well.
Yeah, that's
Very well. The campus is pulled together. The leadership is excellent. The morale is high. People have pulled together in an amazing, effective way. After a period of years where there was struggle with leadership, and since the arrival of Dr. Stork
Right.
and some changes at the other upper levels of leadership, and the faculty remains the best faculty. I'd put them up against anyone.
And I love that you say that, but I also want to mention that you had worked at Cuesta
Yes.
as an employee
Yes.
for many years.
Yes, I
How,
did.
how many years, if I may ask?
I was there for 27 years.
Okay, so this is a place that you know and love, and you left just as the crisis was hitting.
Well, it didn't feel like it.
Right, you didn't know it was about to
we
hit.
had just finished an accreditation and had the highest accolades of any community college. Cuesta has always been in the top 5 community
Right.
colleges in California. I mean, it's always been looked upon with great admiration and respect.
So this has
for
been
good reason.
This has been a tough time then.
It's been a very tough time, and after I retired in '04 and watched these things happening, it was extremely distressing. But that's in the past.
But I do want to ask then. I mean, you had retired. You could have gone, just stayed at home and golfed and do whatever you did. What made you say, you know what, I want to go back?
Well, you said it. I know and love that college. The passion for Cuesta, for community colleges in general, and Cuesta College in particular, is very strong. When Dr. Stork came back as the president,
He's the president, yes.
When he came back in 2010 after some episodes with
Right.
previous leadership, he asked me if I would come back for a period of a few months just to help out, and while they were looking.
This is as an employee.
Yes. So after 7-year absence, I came back again as the executive director of advancement while they did a search. Turned out to be about 18 months. But
Thanks, Gil.
Yeah,
right.
right.
Thanks, Dr. Stork.
It was
right.
during that period that I looked around. And I realized, the first thing I realized was the quality, caliber of faculty had not changed. And they were struggling with this whole accreditation thing, but their classroom focus and on the success and teaching and learning had not changed. But everything else was in a bit of chaos. And so I thought, I'm going to do this. And the person who was sitting in the seat representing District 2 had decided not to run.
So it was an open seat.
Yes.
You wound up winning handily, 70% of the vote.
Yes.
Let me ask you though about matriculation, because many students who attend Cuesta are seeking to move on to Cal Poly or UCSB or wherever it may be. Is the matriculation still moving at a nice clip, or has this crisis caused some issues?
I'm going to say the former. The matriculation is, our faculty, counselors, and leadership at Cuesta over the years have assured that courses are transferable. They've worked very, very hard with other universities, the CSU and UC,
Right.
to make sure that we're transferable. That didn't change. I couldn't give you the statistics, and I'm sure Dr. Stork could,
all
in terms
good.
of
Right.
because so many factors were occurring at the same
Right.
time. It wasn't
When we
just
come back, I want to
accreditation.
talk about state funding, because
Okay.
that's what you're facing right now.
Yes.
For our viewers on HLN, we thank you for joining us. For our other viewers, we'll be right back. So, Trustee George, I want to speak with you about the state. In the background of the accreditation crisis, you had serious funding crises coming down from Sacramento. So how was the college, I know you just joined the board, but that being said, how was the college able to manage the accreditation crisis while the state is cutting community college fees dramatically?
Nobody lifted their head for about 3 years. The workload on that campus, as the campus was downsizing because of state funding cuts and because of the accreditation issues and changes in leadership, I think the most shocking piece of information is that in a 4-year period, the college lost $10 million.
Right.
And out of a $45 million budget, that's big.
Huge, about 20-25%.
And so as Dr. Stork puts it, we had to change the footprint of the college, and that was a painful exercise. I came in kind of on the tail end of that.
Right.
But as a person who was deeply engaged in community services and community outreach for the college, it was hard to watch that, and it was hard for the community to accept it.
At the same time, I think that the general public may have a sense that we're absolutely positively on the other end of the funding crisis. And I want to get a sense from you if we are, because what we hear in the news is Prop 30 passed handily, and the state is facing a surplus. And we had increased per unit fees a few years back, so community colleges should be rolling in it.
That has never been the case.
Never, and still is not.
Never been the case. The community colleges have really always been the stepchild of the higher education system in terms of funding.
Okay.
Now, it's the largest system of higher education in the world.
Right. Literally.
California
Community
Colleges.
That is a true statement.
And 25% of all students who are in higher education in the United States are in a California community college.
That's remarkable.
It is. Now, we have 75% of all the students in higher education in the state of California and receive less than 25% of the funding per student. So UC, CSU, and K-12 all receive a higher per student funding than California community colleges, and that's always been true.
And it's interesting you mentioned K-12 because there's no doubt that Governor Brown has really made K-12 his baby, if I may say. I mean, he has absolutely positively put the entire weight of his administration behind refunding, I guess I'll use that word, K-12. And so we are now at pre-recession levels in terms of base grants for K-12. That didn't happen for K-14.
No, it didn't.
It didn't happen for UC or
That's
CSU.
Right. That's right.
As I understand it, the three systems received about a 5% bump
Yes.
vis-a-vis the prior fiscal year in the new budget. Now, a 5% bump is nice, but when you consider that there had been 20 and 25% cuts over the last 3-4 years,
Yes.
we're still not at pre-recession levels.
No, and it, you know, community colleges have always done a superb job of doing more with less. I hate that expression,
Right.
but we've all been there. K-12, if you look at California public education, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the funding. California, of course, was always number 1, 2, or 3. Now is 48, 49, 50. That's just abominable. It's the right thing to do is to fund our, to improve the funding for
And
K-12.
presumably, if K-12 improves, that should make the community college mission a bit easier. Because so often community college, there's a lot of remedial work that needs to be done.
Well, sure, and that may or may not ever change, and that's fine. We do a good job at everything we do. We are excellent at teaching and learning success.
So what can the community college system do, or what is it doing, to change that status, that stepchild status? Because, look, we know that K-12 is the baby of Governor Brown. UC and CSU, well, those are, they're big gorillas. In community college, like you said, it kind of gets trapped in the middle. In this budget cycle, it was treated equally vis-a-vis the 5% bump. But who knows about the future?
Well, community colleges are an interesting combination of how it's run. UC and CSU have chancellors, and the chancellors have the governor's ear. Period.
Right.
California community colleges are like a state agency, like Caltrans.
And cannot set its own fees, as I understand.
That's right, and so the chancellor, the relationship that the chancellor has with the governor and the board of governors have with state legislators is completely different than the regents and the UC chancellors. Right. So, if we could have that same independence as leaders at the state level, I think that's a big
to think
step.
about.
Now, Henry Ramos is on this board of governors, and he lives locally.
So
and
we'll have to talk to him.
That's a goal of his too.
Her name is Barbara George. She's a member of the Cuesta Community College District. I'm Brad Pomerance. This is California Edition.